It was a Tuesday afternoon in September. She was backing out of the parking space too fast, the way she always did when she was already 3 phone calls behind, and her rear bumper caught the side of a white work van and left a dent the size of a dinner plate just above the wheel well. Underneath the dent, where the van's paint had cracked and peeled back from the impact, a small metal rectangle was visible, bolted to the frame. Military issue. Matte black. A unit designation and a name embossed in standard issue font, the kind that had not been used since before she was born. The name on the badge was her father's. Thomas Reyes had been driving that van for 11 years. He drove it to job sites before dawn and back after dark, and on Saturday mornings with his daughter in the passenger seat. Because his daughter refused to wait at home when there was a job to see, and she had been refusing since she was 4 years old, and nothing about that had changed. The van smelled like joint compound and coffee, and the specific variety of sawdust that comes from cutting old-growth Douglas fir, which has a sweetness to it that cheaper wood doesn't produce. The dent above the wheel well, the new one, was the 14th dent on that van. And Thomas could have told you the story behind every one of them without pausing to think. He was 43 years old, and he had the hands of a man who had been building things since before his voice changed, which was true. Because his father had put a trowel in his right hand at age 9 and told him that a man who could not read a wall had no business standing in front of one. Thomas could read walls. He could read floors, ceilings, load-bearing structures, drainage gradients, the stress patterns in old plaster, and the particular way a 19th-century foundation telegraphed its fatigue through the cracks in a basement corner if you knew what you were looking for and were willing to get close enough to look. His company, Reyes Restoration, 12 employees, established 16 years ago in a converted garage in Bridgeport, had in its portfolio 7 landmarked buildings in the Chicago metropolitan area, 2 federal historic preservation contracts worth a combined $1.9 million, and a waiting list that currently ran 14 months. On the work table in his office, which was a back room off the garage with a folding table and 2 filing cabinets and a photograph on the wall, there was a job file for the Caldwell estate, a 1908 Beaux-Arts mansion in Kenwood that a preservation trust had hired Reyes Restoration to stabilize before a complete renovation. The file was 4 inches thick. Beside it, a letter from the trust's legal representative, dated 12 days ago, notifying Thomas that the estate's primary funder, a holding company controlled by a man named Gerald Ashworth, had placed a lien on the project's disbursement account pending a dispute over the property's chain of title. The letter said the lien would result in a payment freeze on all contractor invoices until the dispute was resolved. It did not say how long that would take. Thomas had 6 employees on that job and payroll due in 9 days, and $187,000 in outstanding invoices that were now frozen. He had not told his daughter. She was 6 years old, and her name was Nora, and she was at this moment sitting in the passenger seat of the van outside a Bridgeport hardware store, reading a field guide to North American birds that she had checked out from the school library and renewed 4 times running because she had not yet finished categorizing all the hawks by wingspread. She wore her hair in a single braid down her back, and she carried, in the inside pocket of her winter coat, a folded piece of paper that she called her observation log, on which she had recorded every bird she had identified by sight since the previous spring. The log was a grocery receipt that Thomas had smoothed flat and folded in thirds, because Nora had needed paper urgently one morning on the way to school, and it was what he had, and she had looked at it and said it was perfect, because it was already organized in columns. She had 43 entries. She was working on 44. Nora had her mother's eyes, dark brown, focused, slightly impatient with anything that moved slower than her own thinking. Her mother had been gone for 3 years. She had not been sick, and there had been no warning, and it had happened on a Thursday, and Thomas had been at a job site when the call came and had sat down on a stack of drywall in a half-framed hallway and had not moved for a long time. He had not cried in front of Nora. He had told her the truth in plain words because she was 3 years old and already sensed dishonesty the way a smoke detector senses something in the air before you can smell it yourself. And she had asked 2 questions. Where did she go, and will she come back? And then asked if they were going to have dinner. And Thomas had made pasta, and they had eaten it together. And that had been the beginning of the only life they had after that. He had 9 days to make payroll. The Caldwell file was still open on the table. He had an appointment that afternoon with the building's project liaison, a woman named Vivienne Caldwell Ashworth, the trust's director and, he had learned from his attorney 40 minutes ago, the daughter of the man whose holding company had filed the lien. On the other side of the city, in a 14th floor office in the Loop, Vivienne Caldwell Ashworth was ending a call she had started in a taxi and had been on for 40 minutes. She was the director of the Meridian Preservation Trust, and she had spent the morning in a deposition for a case that had nothing to do with her, and an afternoon that was supposed to be clear for the Caldwell Estate liaison meeting, which was now complicated by the fact that her father's partner, Gerald Ashworth, her mother's second husband, the man who had taught her the word leverage before she knew what it meant, had filed a lien on a project she had spent 2 years building, for reasons her own attorney described as aggressive, but not obviously fraudulent, which was not the same as innocent. She had pressed Gerald twice that week and received the same answer in 2 different registers. Trust the process. Vivienne, she did not trust the process. She had built a trust fund for historic preservation from nothing, and she knew what process felt like from the inside, and this did not feel like process. This felt like a man covering something up in the dark and expecting her not to notice because the lights were low. She ended the call, picked up her bag, and went to her car. She had a hardware store errand on the way to the site, a paint code for the estate's parlor cornice that she'd promised to deliver to the crew chief, and she was already 20 minutes behind and moving too fast when she pulled into the lot on West 31st Street. She did not check her mirrors. He did not know. When he walked out of the hardware store and saw the black SUV backing out of the space beside his van, that she was already in the parking lot. He did not know whose daughter she was, yet. Vivienne Caldwell Ashworth was on her 3rd call of the afternoon when she felt the impact, a low, solid thud that traveled through the driver's seat and into her spine. And she said the word that came to mind, set the phone on the seat face down, and got out. The van was white, with Reyes Restoration stenciled on the side in plain block letters, and a phone number below that. The dent was above the rear wheel well. Her fault, no question. She had not checked her mirrors, and the paint had cracked along the impact line and peeled back at one edge to reveal something underneath. A metal plate. She looked at it the way you look at something that doesn't belong in the context it has appeared in. Military registry format. Matte black. She had grown up looking at items like this in her father's study, in the locked cabinet he opened twice a year to polish what was inside, handling each piece with the precise, unhurried care of a man who believed that objects carried weight beyond their material value. The name on the badge was Caldwell, R, followed by a unit designation she recognized, because her father had told her the unit number the night before he shipped out, when she was 8 years old and he was saying goodbye in the kitchen with his duffel already at the door. He had told her about the unit. He had told her the number. He had not come back with his badge, and when she asked, years later, where it was, he said it was lost somewhere in the desert, and that some things stayed where they fell. She was 38 years old, and she was looking at her father's name on the side of a work van in a Bridgeport parking lot on a Tuesday in September. And she did not have language for what was in her chest. A man came out of the hardware store. He was carrying a bag and his truck keys, and he stopped when he saw her standing at the rear of his van, and he looked at her face, and then he looked at the van, and then he looked at her face again. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was my fault. I have insurance." He set the bag down. He crouched at the wheel well and looked at the dent and the cracked paint and the plate underneath. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know a man named Robert Caldwell?" She looked at him. "He's my father," she said. He stood up slowly, the way a person stands when they are deciding something about the order of the next several minutes. "My name is Thomas Reyes," he said. "I think you and I need to talk about more than the dent." She was still looking at the badge. Her hand had gone out toward it without her deciding to reach, and stopped just before it touched, the way you stop before touching something that belongs to someone else. Her phone was ringing on the seat behind her. She did not answer it. He bought 2 coffees from the gas station on the corner, and they sat on the hardware store steps, not because it was comfortable, because it was the nearest flat surface, and neither of them was ready to be inside a building, and he told her what he knew. In the order he knew it, with no preamble. He had found the badge 16 years ago, during a renovation of a building on West Cermak that had previously been a storage facility, then a commercial laundry, then derelict for 11 years. It was in a wall cavity, sealed in a piece of oilcloth, along with 3 other items: a folded map with handwritten coordinates, a photograph of 2 soldiers in desert fatigues whose faces he couldn't identify, and a letter in an envelope with no address. He had kept them because they seemed like things that had been deliberately hidden rather than lost. He had bolted the badge to the van's frame, not for display, under the paint, against the chassis. Because he drove past that building every day, and it seemed right that the van carry it. He had run the name through the VA registry twice and reached dead ends both times. "The building on West Cermak," Vivienne said. "Yes, my father owned that building." She said it the way you say a thing you are understanding, at the same speed you are saying it. He sold it in 2001, before the renovation. He let that sit. She had gone still, not the stillness of someone who was calm, the stillness of someone who had just registered a change in what they thought they were looking at, and was now revising everything from the beginning. "The letter," she said, "in the envelope." "I have it," he said. "At the office. I've never opened it. It wasn't addressed to me." She looked at her coffee cup. "My father told me the badge was lost," she said. "He said nothing. He let her have the silence. He told me a lot of things were lost," she said. "Over there." He held his coffee and watched a pigeon investigate the hardware store doormat and said, "My daughter would know what kind that is." "The pigeon. She's categorizing birds." Vivienne looked at him. He looked at the pigeon. "She's in the van," he said. "She's been categorizing birds since April. She has 43. The passenger window of the van was fogging slightly from the inside. Behind it, a small shape was visible with her face turned toward a book, and then the shape looked up, and the face was a girl of about 6, with a single braid, and the specific expression of someone who has concluded that the 2 adults on the hardware store steps are having a conversation worth monitoring. The window came down 2 inches. Nora said, "Dad, that bird is a rock pigeon. Columba livia. They're not even interesting." "Thank you," Thomas said. "You're welcome." The window went back up. Vivienne was looking at the van. Something in her face had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching for it. But it had shifted. She had come to this parking lot on 3 phone calls and a schedule and a confrontation she was already mentally preparing for. And somewhere in the last 4 minutes, all of that had reorganized itself around a 6-year-old girl and her father's badge, and a letter that had been sitting in an office on the South Side for 16 years, with no address on the envelope. "I'll cover the dent," she said. "Full repair, whatever it costs." "I'm not worried about the dent," Thomas said. "No," she said. "I don't suppose you are." Gerald Ashworth arrived at the Caldwell Estate site office at 4:37 that afternoon, which was 22 minutes after Thomas Reyes had arrived for the scheduled liaison meeting, and 7 minutes after Vivienne had walked in from the parking lot with her coat still on and a look that Gerald, who had managed her for 12 years, through 2 executive transitions and 1 hostile board action, immediately identified as trouble. He was 61 and silver-haired, in a suit that announced its own cost without naming it, and he had the particular quality of a man who considered preparation a form of dominance. He set his portfolio on the conference table and straightened the edge with 2 fingers, precisely, mechanically, a gesture he made with every surface he occupied, before he acknowledged anyone in the room. He did not greet Thomas. He looked at him the way you look at an item that has been left in a room where it does not belong. "Is there a reason," he said to Vivienne, "that the contractor is in this meeting?" "Yes," Thomas said. Ashworth looked at him. His 2-finger portfolio adjustment happened again, though the portfolio had not moved. "The Caldwell Estate file," Thomas said, "includes a chain of title search completed by your firm's legal team in March of last year. That search identified no encumbrances on the property between 1998 and 2006. The lien you filed 6 days ago is based on a disputed title claim that traces back to a 2003 commercial transfer. I have the original transfer documents, notarized, from the county recorder's office filed this morning. The transfer was clean. The title claim is Ashworth's 2 fingers were still on the portfolio. The disbursement account lien," Thomas continued in the same register, "the one that dropped half a tone when the stakes went up, was filed under your holding company's name. The holding company received a $340,000 consulting fee from the estate's previous developer in 2002, the same year the chain of title you're now disputing was established. The fee is listed in the developer's own financial disclosures, which are public record. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office has an open inquiry into predatory title disputes against historic preservation projects. That inquiry was opened in January. I spoke with the assigned investigator this morning. Silence. The portfolio adjustment did not happen." Ashworth looked at Vivienne. She was looking at Thomas, not with admiration, with the expression of someone who has just recalculated a distance and found it was shorter than they thought. Ashworth said, quietly, in the register that preceded the kind of response he was about to compose, "You have no idea what you're—" "The disbursement freeze is lifted," Vivienne said. "Today, all outstanding invoices are approved for immediate payment." She looked at Ashworth. "The lien is withdrawn before close of business, or I file the consulting fee disclosure with the state's attorney's office myself, with a cover letter." The room was very still. Ashworth straightened his cuffs. He looked at the portfolio. He looked at the door. The 2-finger adjustment did not come back. He said, "This conversation isn't over." Thomas said, "The door is that way." Ashworth picked up the portfolio. He walked to the door without straightening anything. He did not look back. The door closed, and the latch caught, and the sound of his footsteps on the hallway tile diminished and then stopped, and the room held the silence he left in it. Vivienne stood at the window. Outside, the back garden of the Caldwell estate, the limestone balustrade that needed repointing, the overgrown boxwood that Thomas's crew had been hired to clear, the city going on beyond the fence in its ordinary way. She turned and looked at Thomas. He was already moving his jacket from the back of the chair and picking up his own folder, returning to the next thing, the way he always did, as if the room held no particular drama that required him to stand in it longer than necessary. She said, "How long did it take you to build that file?" "Since the letter from the trust's attorney," he said. 12 days. She looked at him. He looked back. Not performing anything. Not waiting for acknowledgement. She said, "My father's letter." "I'll bring it tomorrow," he said. "It should go to you. It was always going to go to you. I just didn't know where to send it." She drove to her father's house that evening, a narrow 2-story in Lincoln Square where Robert Caldwell had lived for 30 years, where the kitchen smelled of something from before she was born, and the front hallway still had the coat hooks he had drilled into the wall when she was 9. 2 of them still holding coats that had not moved since her mother died. She rang the bell. He answered in his cardigan, the reading glasses still on, and he looked at her face and knew, the way fathers know, that she was not there for a regular visit. She set the photograph on the kitchen table. The 2 soldiers in desert fatigues. Her father sat down slowly and looked at it for a long time without touching it, and then he reached out and put one finger on the edge, just the edge, not the faces, and held it there. "That's Donnelly," he said. "Eddie Donnelly. He was from Rockford." She waited. "He's gone," her father said. 1989. She did not ask how. The way he said it told her not to. He told her the rest without her asking, in the order that made sense to him, which was not chronological but associative, the building first, because the building was where it started. He had stored things there during a period when he was not able to bring them home and not able to let them go, a distinction she understood in the abstract and was beginning to understand more specifically as he talked. The badge was part of what he stored. The letter was from Donnelly's wife, written after, addressed to Robert, and never sent, because by the time it was written the address she had was already wrong, and she had given it to Robert in person at the funeral, and he had kept it because it said things he did not want to lose, and could not yet carry. He had hidden it with the badge because both of them belonged to the same part of his life, the part with no room in a frame on the mantel. He said he had told her the badge was lost because she had been 8 years old and he had not wanted to explain the cabinet in the building to a child. And then she had grown up, and the moment for explaining it had passed the way those moments do. Not in a single decision, but in the accumulating weight of all the days he let go by, without finding the words, until the words felt too large for the room. Vivienne listened. She did not tell him it was all right, because this was not a situation that called for forgiveness. It called for something smaller and more specific, which was her sitting at her father's kitchen table and letting him say the things he had kept in the cabinet of himself for 30 years. She sat there while he said them. Then she told him about Thomas Reyes, about the van, about the letter, kept for 16 years in a back office because it seemed like something placed rather than lost. She told him a man named Thomas Reyes had known, without knowing anything about the war or the cabinet or the building, that the right thing to do with someone else's hidden object was to hold it until the right person came for it. Her father took his glasses off and held them in both hands. "I'd like to meet him," he said. "I think you will," she said. 6 months later. Nora had 49 birds in the observation log, 49 entries in careful, deliberate handwriting, each with the date, the location, the wingspread where she could estimate it, and a small pencil sketch in the margin that was getting better with every entry. She had started a second log. She brought both logs to the Caldwell estate on the Saturdays when Thomas brought her to the site, and she worked on them in the estate's back garden while he was inside. Because the garden had a hedgerow that attracted warblers in the autumn migration, and she had already identified 3 species that were not in the first guide, and had requested a second guide from the school library. The estate was 4 months into renovation and 6 months from completion. Thomas had expanded his crew by 3 people to manage the scope. The Meridian Preservation Trust had sent a letter in January nominating Rhea's restoration for a Regional Craftsman Award, which Thomas had read once and put in the drawer with his other letters, because the work on the wall in front of him was more interesting than anything in the drawer. Vivienne came to the site on Saturdays too, not always, but often enough that Nora had stopped reporting her arrival as notable and had started reporting the birds instead, on the theory that the birds were rarer. She had brought her father twice. The second time, Robert Caldwell had walked the estate's ground floor with Thomas for an hour, looking at the original plaster medallions and the restored mahogany window surrounds. And at the end of the hour he had said, quietly, that whoever had done this work understood what the building was trying to be. Thomas had said he appreciated that. Robert had nodded, and then he had gone to find his daughter, and on his way through the garden he had stopped beside Nora and asked what she was drawing. A yellow-rumped warbler, Nora said, without looking up. Setophaga coronata. They have a yellow patch on their rump, which is how you know. Robert Caldwell had looked at the sketch for a moment. "Your father taught you to look that carefully?" he said. She looked up then. "We taught each other," she said. On a Saturday in March, the light in the estate's east parlor was the kind that only came in that room at that hour. Low and lateral, catching the dust in the air above the newly plastered cornice and turning it into something almost worth painting. Thomas was checking the set on a section of finish plaster along the north wall, his hand moving slowly across the surface with the particular attention of someone who could read the difference between nearly right and right. Vivienne was at the parlor doorway with 2 coffees, watching him work. She had stopped performing the version of herself that arrived 3 calls behind schedule. It had happened gradually, the way things that are real happen, not in a moment, but across a series of moments, until she looked back and could not locate the last day she had felt the need to calculate the distance to the door. She came in and set his coffee on the windowsill where he could reach it, and stood beside him looking at the wall. He said, without turning, "The cornice in the northeast corner is going to need 1 more coat." She looked at the corner. "How can you tell?" He touched the plaster, 2 fingers, light, the way you touch something you know. "The color," he said. "It dries half a shade darker when there's enough body to hold. That corner's still flat. Give it a week." She looked at the corner. She looked at his hand on the wall. She looked at the narrow space between his hand and her hand, which were both resting now on the same section of cornice, neither of them having moved away. Outside, from the direction of the garden, Nora's voice arrived through the open window, carrying the particular urgency of someone who has made an entry that changes the count. 50, she said, to no one in particular, or to both of them. Common merganser. Mergus merganser. I wasn't expecting that one. Thomas said to the wall, "Nobody ever is." Vivienne laughed. It was a short sound, unguarded, the kind that comes before you decide to let it. Neither of them moved their hands. The things that matter most are not lost. They wait, in the dark, for the one pair of hands that will know what they are. Some things are placed carefully, by someone who believed the right person would eventually come along and know what they were looking at. The war ends. The building changes hands. The paint covers what's underneath. And then one ordinary Tuesday, someone backs out too fast, and the impact finds the thing that was always there. And it turns out the only reason it was hidden was that it was waiting for the one set of hands that would know to keep it. If this story reached you, if you've ever found something you weren't supposed to find, or been found by someone who wasn't looking, share it with one person today who needs to hear that some things survive. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments if you had kept something hidden for years, not to deceive, but because you didn't know yet how to give it to the right person. How would you know when the time had finally come? We read every one,